Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The ride back from the Vandenberg mansion was suffocatingly quiet, broken only by the faint sounds of Zoe shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She had positioned herself as far as possible from me, leaning against the car door with her arms folded tightly across her chest. The passing streetlights cast fleeting shadows on her face, each flicker emphasizing the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. Not that it bothered me. Her silent fury only added fuel to the blaze of my own emotions. My fingers gripped the steering wheel with such intensity that the blood drained from my knuckles, leaving them ghostly pale. My mind churned, replaying the events of the night, while an almost uncontrollable urge to slam my fist into the dashboard gripped me. But I resisted, forcing my focus to remain on the dark, empty road ahead. The evening at Penelope and Randy Vandenberg's lavish Naperville estate, known for its glittering soirees, had turned into something out of a nightmare. Their events were usually about high-end wines, gourmet hors d'oeuvres, and an assortment of wealthy attendees seeking an evening of refined indulgence. But tonight was anything but typical. At first, the gathering unfolded predictably, guests mingling on the patio, polite chatter about rising property values, and generous compliments on Penelope's impeccable decor. While these parties never appealed to me, Zoe thrived in the atmosphere. She floated from group to group with ease, laughing at banal jokes, exchanging gossip, and collecting numbers for future brunches. As always, I hung back with a whiskey in hand, content to let her shine while I observed from the sidelines. But something about this evening felt off. Penelope's enigmatic comment about spicing things up, paired with a sly smile, sent an uneasy ripple through me. The stolen glances shared between guests only deepened my suspicion. At first I dismissed it as an overactive imagination, that is, until I noticed the bowl. It was an elegant glass centerpiece displayed prominently on Penelope's dining table. Its modern, artistic design seemed more suited to an upscale gallery than a suburban party. At first glance, I assumed it was a place for guests to deposit their keys, a practical touch for an evening fueled by fine wine. But as the night wore on, the reality of its purpose began to dawn on me. Women in designer gowns approached the bowl with coy smiles, dropping their keys inside with a mix of playfulness and secrecy. Meanwhile, the men exchanged smug grins and barely contained chuckles, their behavior reminiscent of giddy schoolboys in on a private joke. A knot formed in my stomach as I pieced it together. This was no ordinary party. It was a swingers' lottery. Across the room, I spotted Zoe chatting comfortably with Randy by the fireplace, her laughter as light and carefree as ever. My breath hitched as the realization hit me. Did she know? My pulse quickened, and before I could stop myself, I made my way to her. My voice was tense as I whispered, "We need to talk." Her cheerful expression faltered briefly. "Now? Can it wait?" she replied, her tone laced with annoyance. "No," I said firmly. Taking her arm, firmly but not harshly, I led her toward the study. Randy's self-satisfied smirk followed us, stoking the flames of my growing anger. Once inside the dimly lit room, I shut the door, the tension between us thick and suffocating. "Do you know what's going on out there?" I demanded, my voice low but trembling with anger. Zoe's expression didn't waver. She crossed her arms and replied flatly, "Adam, don't make a scene." I stepped closer, my voice lowering further. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Her lips curved into a faint, almost defiant smirk before she answered. "Of course I knew. Everyone knows." Ooh, and her words hit me like a slap. "Everyone?" I echoed, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "What do you mean, everyone knows?" "Adam, it's not that serious," she said with an exasperated sigh. "It's just harmless fun. People get bored and need a little excitement. Not everyone is content with sitting on the couch and watching football reruns every weekend." Her casual dismissal felt like a betrayal. "And you thought I'd just go along with it? You didn't even think to tell me?" "Because I knew how you'd react," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "Look at yourself, acting like it's some kind of catastrophe. You're such a prude, Adam." Her words cut deep, but I forced myself to respond. So you expected me to… what? Join in? Reach into that bowl and play along like it's some sick game show? Is this what our marriage means to you? It's just a game, she said dismissively. You're overreacting. The woman standing before me seemed like a stranger. The partner I thought I knew, the person I'd vowed to share my life with, was defending something I found indefensible. The cracks in our relationship, once subtle, had become a chasm too wide to ignore. I squared my shoulders, speaking with quiet resolve. We're leaving. Now. If this… I gestured toward the door, indicating the party beyond, is more important to you than our marriage, then don't bother coming home. Her eyes narrowed, uncertainty flickering across her face. After a moment, she muttered, Fine, let's go. Without waiting for her, I exited the study and strode through the party, ignoring the laughter and chatter around me. My path led me directly to the glass bowl. With all eyes turning toward me, I reached in, grabbed a random set of keys, and held them up. For the record, I said, my voice cutting through the room's murmur, I find this disgusting. My marriage is not a game, and if any of you think otherwise, you're pathetic. I dropped the keys back into the bowl with a sharp clatter and stormed toward the front door. The stunned silence behind me was all the confirmation I needed of the night's absurdity. The cold air outside hit my face as I stepped into the night, but it did little to calm the storm raging within me. The drive home was a blur. Zoe remained silent until we reached our driveway. As I killed the engine, she erupted. You embarrassed me, she yelled, slamming the car door before I had even gotten out. You humiliated me in front of everyone, Adam, everyone! I climbed out slowly, her words crashing over me like waves. You mean your group of swingers? I shot back coldly. Forgive me if I'm not concerned about their hurt feelings. She whirled around, her eyes blazing. They are our friends. No, I corrected, my voice sharp. They were your friends. I didn't agree to trade spouses with them. She let out a sharp breath, flinging her arms upward in visible frustration. You're making this into such a spectacle. This isn't some grand act of treachery. No one's being coerced into anything here. It's just a choice. A choice? I repeated, disbelief laced through my voice like venom. A choice to betray your husband and mask it as some warped party game? To throw away 22 years of marriage because you're feeling restless? My voice quivered with barely restrained anger. Her eyes narrowed, her expression hardening like stone. Don't you dare! She shot back, jabbing a finger in my direction. Don't stand there acting like some moral beacon, Adam. You're so lost in your self-righteous pity that you can't even see how unbearable you've become. Do you think this, any of this, is happiness? She gestured wildly toward the house, her movements frantic. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. This suburban prison, she had called it. That's how she viewed the life we had created together. Our home, our family, the years of shared laughter and struggles. To her, it was all meaningless. Fine, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging within me. Maybe it isn't enough. But if this is what you've chosen, defending something so disgusting, then I don't know what we're even fighting for. My words hung in the air, sharp and unfiltered. She rolled her eyes, turning toward the stairs. I'm done with this conversation tonight. Oh no, you're not, I said, trailing her, my voice rising. You're not walking away from this. You're going to make a decision right now. She halted at the base of the stairs, her back still to me. You don't get to control me, Adam, she said coldly, her words as cutting as a blade. Not anymore. Her statement lingered in the air as she ascended the stairs, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt hollow. The once warm home, filled with our children's laughter and shared moments, now seemed like an empty shell. The next morning, the silence was oppressive. I sat at the kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee before me, my eyes fixed on the worn surface of the wood. Scratches from school projects, stains from countless spills, and faint grooves from late-night conversations were all etched into its surface. Yet, in that moment, it felt as though the life those marks represented was slipping through my fingers. Sleep had eluded me. After Zoe's retreat upstairs, I'd spent the night pacing the living room, her words replaying in my mind like a broken record. Suburban prison, bored, suffocating. Her footsteps broke the silence, and she entered the kitchen with a casual air, as if nothing had transpired the night before. Her hair was loosely tied back, and she wore leggings and an oversized sweatshirt. She opened the fridge, rummaging for breakfast like it was just another Saturday morning. "Morning," she said flatly, without so much as a glance in my direction. I stared at her, waiting for any acknowledgement of the previous night. None came. Only the sound of orange juice being poured into a glass. "That's it?" I asked sharply. "Morning? That's all you have to say?" She sighed and leaned against the counter, her weariness either genuine or performative. I couldn't tell. "What do you want me to say? You've already made it clear where you stand." "I want to know where you stand," I shot back, my frustration spilling over. "I gave you a choice, Zoe. You walked away from it. So what now? Are you staying or are you going back to your little key party?" Her eyes narrowed and she slammed the glass on the counter. "You don't get to demand answers from me." "I'm your husband," I growled, my palm hitting the table with a loud thud. "I deserve answers." "You're insufferable," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "Everything with you is black and white. There's no room for anything else." I laughed bitterly. "You call this growth? Destroying our marriage is what you think growth looks like?" Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't respond. She turned and walked away, leaving me once more in the stifling emptiness that had overtaken our home. By the time she vanished upstairs, I had reached my limit. Her indifference, her betrayal, her refusal to give me the respect I deserved, it was too much. If she wouldn't give me answers, I'd have to find my own way forward. The crisp morning air cooled my overheated mind as I sat on the porch steps, grappling with my next move. Our life wasn't perfect, but I'd poured too much into it to let her destroy everything on a whim. If Zoe wanted to reduce our marriage to ashes, she'd have to face the consequences. That afternoon, I found myself in the sleek office of Brian Cooper, an old friend turned high-powered divorce attorney. The view of the bustling downtown streets through his wide windows felt disconnected from the chaos consuming my life. Brian listened intently as I recounted everything: the party, Zoe's actions, her dismissal of my concerns, and the fallout it had caused. When I finished, he let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. "Swinger parties," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's a new one, even for Naperville." "This isn't funny, Brian," I snapped, glaring at him. He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax. I'm not joking. This is serious, and you're smart to come to me now. The sooner we act, the better." He grabbed a legal pad, scribbling notes. "First, we'll file for divorce. With proof of infidelity, we'll have a strong case for asset division and custody. Courts often favor mothers, but if we can show her behavior is destabilizing or harmful, we'll have a solid chance of securing primary custody for you." "I won't let her drag the kids into this mess," I said firmly. "Whatever it takes." "Good," he replied with a nod. "I'll need everything you have: texts, emails, receipts. I'll also bring in my PI. If Zoe's meeting with these people, we'll find proof." "Frank Carter's already on it," I said. "He's thorough." Brian raised an eyebrow, impressed. "Smart move. Let him dig. Once we have evidence, we'll serve her the papers. She doesn't need to know we're filing until it's too late for her to react." I nodded, a faint sense of relief breaking through the tension. At least now I had a plan. After enduring days of uncertainty, a concrete plan finally took shape in my mind. For the first time in ages, I wasn't simply reacting to events. I was taking control. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and meticulous planning. On Thursday, Frank contacted me with the results of his investigation. "Got everything you asked for," he said, his gruff voice devoid of any emotion. "Emails, texts, photos, the whole lot. Turns out she's been meeting Stephen at the downtown Hilton. Not exactly subtle." Even though I had anticipated this, hearing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of pain crashing over me. Somehow the reality of it hurt more than the suspicion, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I suppressed the ache and stayed focused. "Send all of it to Brian," I instructed. "Make sure every detail is rock solid." "Got it," Frank replied. Then, after a brief pause, he added, But there's something else you should know. What is it? I asked, bracing myself for another blow. There's chatter about a big event at the Vandenbergs' place next weekend. Looks like they're doubling down even after your speech shook things up. Could be worth keeping an eye on. I clenched my jaw. Of course they would. Penelope and Randy thrived on scandal and defiance, feeding off the chaos they created. They were experts at burying their secrets and ignoring consequences. But if they thought their duplicity would remain hidden, they were sorely mistaken. That weekend, with Zoe conveniently out with friends, I drove past the Vandenbergs' mansion. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, and the soft glow from the porch lights bathed the quiet street in a warm hue. I parked a few blocks away and observed from a distance. Laughter and animated chatter spilled into the night as impeccably dressed couples entered, the scene reminiscent of a grand gala. I didn't need to infiltrate the event. Frank had already ensured someone would document everything. I remained in my car, picturing the chaos that would soon engulf their world. By week's end, the tangled web of lies the Vandenbergs had spun would come crashing down. On Monday, Brian called with an update. "It's done," he said. "The divorce papers are set to be delivered tomorrow. Oh, and the Naperville Times will be running a piece on the Vandenbergs' extracurricular activities. My journalist friend couldn't resist." "Good," I replied, my tone icy. "They deserve it." Brian chuckled. "You're handling this like a pro, Adam. Stay out of the spotlight and let the chaos unfold. When the dust settles, you'll come out on top." I thanked him and ended the call, then turned my attention to the stack of evidence Frank had provided. Every text Zoe exchanged with Stephen, every hotel receipt, every incriminating email, all of it laid out like exhibits in a courtroom. This had become more than just proving her betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life and my sense of self. The next day, the papers were served to Zoe while she was out having lunch with Penelope. Frank's account of her reaction was priceless. Shock, disbelief, and finally, simmering anger. That evening, she stormed into the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. "Adam!" she shouted, marching into the living room where I sat with the kids. "We need to talk." I rose to my feet, keeping my voice steady. "Why don't you two head upstairs for a bit?" I said gently to the kids. They didn't need to witness what was coming. Once they were out of earshot, Zoe hurled the divorce papers onto the coffee table. "What the hell is this?" "It's a divorce," I said calmly, folding my arms. "You're really doing this? Over one argument?" she snapped. "This isn't about one argument, Zoe," I replied firmly. "It's about your lies, your betrayal, and throwing away 22 years of marriage for him." Her face flushed with anger. "It's not what you think," she protested. "Oh, really?" I shot back, tossing the evidence onto the table. "Then explain this, because these messages and receipts paint a pretty clear picture." Her eyes widened as she scanned the documents, her face losing its color. For a brief moment I thought she might break down, but then her expression hardened. The defiance I had grown so used to seeing returned. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "But you left me no choice." "No, Zoe," I said, stepping closer, my voice unwavering. "You left me no choice. You lied, you betrayed me, and now you'll face the consequences." Her jaw tightened as she crossed her arms. "Do you even understand what you're doing? You're tearing everything apart. For the kids, for us." "For the kids?" I said, my voice rising. "Don't you dare use them to justify your actions. You were the one sneaking around with Stephen, not me." "I wasn't sneaking," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you, Adam." "But you did," I replied, my voice shaking. "You hurt me, and you hurt this family, and I'm done pretending we can fix this." For a long moment we stood in silence, the weight of 22 years of shared history bearing down on us. Finally she spoke, her voice hollow. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just giving up?" "I'm not giving up," I said firmly. "I'm moving on, and you should too." The fallout was swift and devastating. By the end of the week, the Naperville Times published their exposé on the Vandenbergs' infamous parties, complete with anonymous testimonies and damning details. The article spread like wildfire through the city's elite social circles, leaving friendships shattered, reputations in ruins, and businesses tied to the Vandenbergs in shambles. Zoe wasn't spared. Though her name wasn't explicitly mentioned, the whispers and sidelong glances at the grocery store made it clear she wasn't above suspicion. A few days later, she confronted me in the kitchen, her arms crossed tightly. "Was this your doing?" she demanded. I met her gaze calmly. "I didn't write the article, if that's what you're asking." "But you made it happen," she accused, her voice trembling. "You gave them the information." I didn't deny it. People deserve the truth, Zoe. If you and your friends wanted to avoid this being exposed, you should have made different choices. Her cheeks flushed a deep red with fury, but she didn't offer a single word in reply. Instead, she stormed out of the house, the door slamming so hard it rattled the frame. For the first time in weeks, an unusual stillness filled the room, as if a storm had finally passed. The divorce was finalized within a few months. With undeniable proof of her infidelity and the ensuing public backlash, Zoe had little ground to stand on during negotiations. I was awarded primary custody of our children, ownership of the house, and the majority of our financial assets. Zoe moved to a modest apartment across town, a far cry from the life we had built together. She occasionally reached out regarding the children, but our conversations were short and devoid of any personal connection. The bond we once shared, the warmth and intimacy that had defined our marriage, had evaporated. Yet for the first time in years, I felt a sense of liberation. The children and I gradually found a rhythm, a life no longer dictated by Zoe's restless need for adventure or her constant criticisms. Transitioning to this new reality wasn't easy. Some nights, loneliness crept in, and I'd find myself gazing at old photographs, trying to piece together how everything had unraveled so completely. But those moments didn't last long. With each passing day, it became increasingly clear how much of myself I'd lost in trying to keep her happy. One crisp autumn Saturday, I took the kids to the local park. The sun bathed the colorful leaves in a golden glow as Sophie chased a soccer ball across the grass. Hannah, ever engrossed in her books, was perched on a bench, nose buried in her latest read. Meanwhile, Adam Jr., my little daredevil, was determined to conquer the tallest tree in sight. "Need some help up there, buddy?" I called, walking closer as he stretched for another branch. "Nope, I've got it, Dad," he shouted back, grinning down at me. I laughed and took a step back, giving him space to figure it out on his own. Watching him cling to the tree with determination, I was struck by a profound realization. Despite everything we'd endured, we were still standing. Our family wasn't broken. We were growing, learning how to become stronger. As I soaked in the simplicity of the moment, a woman approached me. She seemed about my age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. Her blonde hair was loosely braided, and she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Rachel. My son is playing soccer with your daughter." She gestured toward the field, where Sophie and a boy her age were kicking the ball back and forth. "I'm Adam," I replied, shaking her hand. "It's nice to meet you." We chatted for a while, sharing parenting stories and laughing over the small, universal challenges of raising kids. Her presence felt light and natural, a sharp contrast to the tension that had clouded my relationship with Zoe in recent years. When Rachel smiled, it felt genuine, unforced. As she turned to leave, she glanced back with a warm smile. "Maybe we'll see each other here again next weekend." "Maybe," I replied, returning her smile. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table helping Sophie with her math homework, a surprising realization struck me. I felt a glimmer of hope, something I hadn't experienced in months. Life hadn't gone the way I had planned, but perhaps that wasn't such a bad thing. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited about the possibilities ahead. Zoe's story didn't end. She simply began a different chapter, and for the kids and me, that was more than enough to move forward. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating, The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Pinpointing the exact moment when everything began to shift feels like an impossible task. My world has always revolved around my husband, James. To those looking in from the outside, we likely appear to be the perfect couple. James is often described as the ideal husband, handsome, successful, and captivating. He has an effortless charisma and a commanding presence that turns heads wherever he goes. Even at 57, he exudes a magnetic confidence that seems to defy time. As for me, Abigail, I sometimes feel that the years have been less kind. We've shared 35 years of marriage, and while I occasionally receive compliments from men, I've learned to dismiss them, particularly when arrogance overshadows their intent. Now at 53, I've grown to appreciate the person I've become. My brown eyes, matching hair, and a figure that has held up well over the years bring me quiet satisfaction. Staying active has always been part of my routine. Yoga helps keep me in shape, though I'm far from obsessive. I indulge in life's little pleasures, good food and wine among them, even if they've added a few pounds here and there. I run a retail store and find joy in books, puzzles, and games. Our adult children, Robert and Mary, live nearby, which means frequent family gatherings that I cherish deeply. Despite the years, the physical connection between James and me remains intact. Yet one thing has lingered throughout our marriage, a sense of incompleteness in our intimate life. Strangely enough, this seems to bother James more than it does me. Beyond that, he's a considerate and affectionate partner, and I truly enjoy his company. One year, I invited James to attend my company's New Year's party with me, an event I always look forward to as a chance to dress up and enjoy a lively evening together. As expected, James slipped effortlessly into the social scene, charming everyone he met with his natural ease. After some time, I left him at the bar and joined my colleagues on the dance floor. Initially, it was just a group of women, but soon a few younger men joined us. Among them was Joseph, our new supply manager. Joseph and I had always gotten along well, and our conversations were light and pleasant. Joseph's youth, athletic build, and charisma didn't go unnoticed. He seemed especially attentive to me, which was both flattering and a little unexpected. Eventually, I returned to check on James and found him sitting at the bar, his demeanor unusually subdued. His expression suggested he was ready to leave. "Sorry, darling," I said. "I lost track of time chatting." "With everyone, or just him?" James asked, nodding in Joseph's direction. "That's Joseph," I explained. "He's a colleague. We were just enjoying the dance floor." James's tone remained steady, though his words carried weight. "I saw the way you looked at him. You like him." His statement, delivered with quiet certainty, caught me off guard. "What? No. Well, maybe. I hadn't really thought about it." But as the words left my mouth, I realized there was some truth to them. It did feel nice to be noticed. While I couldn't deny Joseph's appeal, I wasn't interested in pursuing anything beyond a friendly working relationship. Even if Joseph harbored intentions, I had no desire to act on them. To my surprise, James didn't respond with anger. He accepted my words calmly, without bitterness. For the rest of the evening, I focused on being close to him. That night, something unexpected happened. My attraction to James intensified. We shared an incredible evening together, and afterward he asked, "Was it Joseph who got you excited?" I hesitated, then chose honesty. "Maybe a little," I admitted, "but mostly it was you." Seeing that James wasn't upset emboldened me. "It's flattering to get attention from a younger man," I continued, "but it doesn't compare to what we have. All that energy, it's for you." That conversation marked a turning point for us. We began talking about our desires more openly, and our intimacy deepened. I started experimenting with lingerie I knew James loved, particularly stockings and heels. When we went out, I found myself flirting with him, rediscovering a playful side of my sexuality. Our conversations began to include fantasies involving hypothetical partners, often celebrities or athletes. Through it all, I made sure James knew how much I adored him. We even began watching adult films together, including some with themes of infidelity, which added an exciting layer to our relationship. At work, Joseph continued to flirt, and though I enjoyed the attention, I never allowed it to go beyond that. Joseph's invitations to spend time together grew more frequent, and while I always declined, part of me wondered what it might be like to say yes. Eventually, I realized it was time to share these feelings with James. One evening I said, "I love you more than anything in this world. You're everything I could ever want in a husband." James smiled warmly. "I love you too," he said, "but I can tell there's something on your mind." I hesitated, but knew I couldn't hold back. "Do you remember when we talked about trying new things in our intimate life? I've been thinking about it a lot, and I feel like I want to explore this curiosity before it's too late. I wonder what it might be like with someone else." James looked perplexed, and I understood the weight of what I was suggesting. "Joseph invited me to spend the weekend with him," I confessed. "I think it could help us understand what we've been discussing. Remember the video about the open wife we watched? Maybe we could explore that idea together." James's response was measured but tinged with resignation. "That was just a fantasy, Abigail." "But what if it could be more?" I asked. "Joseph knows about you, and I don't see him as a threat to our marriage. I enjoy his attention, but my heart belongs to you. I'll tell you everything, and I promise it won't change how I feel about you." "Have you already done something with him?" James asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "No," I assured him. "We've kept everything professional, but I'd like to explore this and still come home to you." Making this decision wasn't easy. It wasn't about replacing James or diminishing our love. It was about taking a leap of faith and exploring something new together, even if it came with risks. The weight in James's gaze carried a pain that words could never convey. Though he remained silent, his face betrayed the storm within. What I'd said clearly struck a chord, though his response wasn't anger but a quiet disbelief. For me, the matter was significant, yet his reaction suggested a deeper hurt, a fracture that went beyond my own perspective. Despite the countless reassurances I'd read about how common such situations were, the thought of something unique, uncharted, lingered uneasily in my mind. James leaned against the wall, his balance seeming unsure. It wasn't my intention to cause him pain, and his lack of overt confrontation offered a small reprieve. That night, neither of us found rest. My mind raced, replaying the conversation, questioning if I'd made a mistake. By morning, James appeared calmer, his composed demeanor offering a fragile sense of hope. Perhaps he was beginning to see some merit in my suggestion, even if accepting it wasn't easy. Deep down, I knew that unconventional desires were far more common than anyone admitted aloud. A part of me dared to believe this could reignite something between us. Still, I didn't want to dwell on it any longer. Determined to move forward, I slipped into the garter belt, the delicate bra, and the barely there thong. The ensemble made me feel a blend of courage and elegance, though the act of wearing it for someone else seemed surreal. Yet, it undeniably stirred a thrill within me. Joseph's striking features and confident air only amplified the magnetic pull I felt toward him. Guilt briefly tried to surface, but the excitement quickly swept it aside. As I packed my bag with dresses, shoes, and intimate pieces, I turned to James. "I'll be back Sunday," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Be ready to meet me then. I'll stay in touch." James's expression revealed his unease, though he kept his thoughts mostly to himself. I assured myself I'd check in with him regularly. When Joseph first laid eyes on me in this attire, his reaction was immediate and intense. I'd made sure he noticed every detail, from the stockings to the garter, and his captivated gaze filled me with a heady sense of power. The tension between us felt palpable, and I couldn't suppress the anticipation building inside me. "How did James take it?" Joseph asked, his tone casual but curious. "Not as well as I'd hoped," I admitted, "but not as badly as I feared." His lack of resistance had surprised me. "And he's aware of what we're doing?" Joseph pressed further. "Yes," I replied, recalling how carefully I'd chosen my words with James. I had framed it as a shared journey, something we could both explore together. To my amazement, he hadn't argued against it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his acceptance was more of a concession than true agreement. The idea of sending James a photo as a way to gauge his feelings crossed my mind. With a steadying breath, I called him. "Hey, love, I got here safely. The hotel is stunning. How are you holding up?" The pause on the other end stretched uncomfortably before his reply came through as a text. "Have a great time. I had dinner with Robert and Mary." A flicker of unease settled in. What had he told the kids? Surely he wouldn't have shared too much. That wasn't like him. Still, I hoped he was keeping his feelings in check and perhaps even thinking of me. Joseph's effortless charm pulled me back to the moment. "Let's send him a photo," he suggested later during dinner. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I chose a picture from the restaurant and captioned it, "We're having a wonderful time." My initial message had been more sentimental, but I toned it down to something neutral. James's reply, when it came, struck a nerve. "Looks like you're enjoying yourself, all dressed up, though I noticed the ring is missing." His words brought a rush of memories from our anniversary, a night that felt irreplaceable. I didn't want him to feel excluded or replaced. "Don't worry," I typed back. "By Sunday it'll be on my finger again. I love you." The guilt gnawed at me, but I convinced myself that my time with Joseph didn't diminish my love for James. After dinner, Joseph and I lingered over cocktails, the atmosphere charged with unspoken tension. Declining another round, we made our way to the room. On the way, I messaged James again. "Heading up. Hope this excites you. I'll be the wife you love again very soon. How are you feeling?" Before I could put my phone away, Joseph's kiss broke through my thoughts, igniting a passion that sent a shiver down my spine. "You won't regret this, Abigail," he murmured. "Maybe we could make this a regular thing, if James is open to it." His suggestion thrilled and unsettled me in equal measure. In the bathroom, I slipped out of my dress and caught my reflection in the mirror. The lingerie fit perfectly, but the silence from James loomed over me like a shadow. Finally, I sent another message. "James, are you there? You've been so quiet. I love you." His response came at last, a single word. "Yes." Relief mingled with doubt. His brief reply mirrored his unease, leaving me to question whether this experience was bringing us closer or driving us further apart. Hoping to lighten the mood, I sent him a playful selfie, but his lack of response weighed heavily on me. Sensing my distraction, Joseph chuckled and made an offhand comment about puzzles. "Puzzles?" I asked, puzzled myself. "Check his messages," Joseph suggested with a knowing smirk. Curiosity got the better of me. I reread James's replies, trying to piece together the meaning behind his words and silence, searching for the message he wasn't openly sharing. The realization hit me with the force of a thunderclap, sharp, inescapable, and brutally clear. Divorce. The word reverberated in my mind, a bitter refrain that filled me with suffocating dread. A weight settled in my chest, regret surging through me like a tidal wave. In a frenzy, I dialed again, only to be met with oppressive silence. Panic clawed at my thoughts as I scrambled to dress, my fingers shaking as I fumbled with my shoes. Joseph watched me, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "I need to get home," I stammered, the urgency driving every move. He stepped forward, his voice steady but worried. "What's going on? Talk to me." Instead of answering, I shoved my phone at him, displaying the messages. His expression darkened as he scanned the screen. "This is bad," he muttered. "You don't think he'll do something reckless, do you?" Then, after a pause, he added nervously, "I can't let my wife find out about this." A jolt of disbelief hit me. "Wait, you're married?" The words escaped before I could stop them. He nodded, guilt etched across his face, but I was already moving, frantically typing another message. "I'm coming now." Joseph grabbed his keys and we rushed out together. As he drove, I kept calling, leaving message after desperate message. My thoughts spun in a storm of fear and regret. Then came the reply, curt and cold. "Abigail had her fun. Thanks for the warning. Gives me time to prepare." My stomach churned. "Please don't do anything rash," I begged, my hands trembling as I typed. Every second felt like a sharp reminder of my mistakes, each moment unraveling the past. Loving him now felt like a cruel irony, a memory stained beyond recognition. Another message arrived, cutting deeper. Legally, I have no other choice. I tried to plead, typing furiously. I'm not seeing him anymore. I choose you. His response was merciless. It doesn't matter. You wanted him, and I won't stop you. Your body, your choice. Did you even know he's married with 3 kids? The words pierced through me, leaving me reeling. As I struggled to process them, another message appeared. Take your time. I'm leaving. Lost my job just before retirement. I'm going traveling. And then the final blow. Oh, and I found another word. I scrolled through the messages, my chest tightening as I read them again. Chance, love, law, whore. Each word felt like a slap, the pain growing with every syllable. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the sight that greeted me made my legs give way. A for sale sign loomed in the yard like a grim sentinel. The house, our refuge, the space we had filled with memories, now belonged to the past. Inside, the kitchen table held the divorce papers, already signed. His belongings were gone, leaving an emptiness that was louder than any argument. The realization struck hard. He was truly gone, slipping further out of reach with every passing second. Desperate, I sent one last message, my heart laid bare. This can't be the end. I love you. I know you love me too. For 2 endless weeks I clung to hope, but his silence was an abyss that consumed me. Then one day, an envelope arrived. The handwriting was unmistakably his, a bitter comfort. Inside was his wedding ring. Tears streamed down my face, grief breaking through the fragile dam of composure I'd tried to maintain. The next day, my phone buzzed. His message was casual, detached. Hey, just wanted to let you know I arrived safely. The resort is amazing. Attached was a photo of an idyllic beach, turquoise waves lapping at golden sands. The image mocked me, its serenity a cruel contrast to my turmoil. My reply was instant. I'm sorry, James. Please come home. His response was devastating. He mentioned a woman named Camila, describing her as kind and welcoming. Another photo followed, a radiant woman lounging by the water, her vibrant bikini catching the sun. My chest tightened as I read his words, a mirrored echo of the night I had sent him away. His tone was laden with bitterness. Every day here is amazing. Oh, and I saw you return the ring. Respect for that. Hope you're doing well. And then, the final blow, no chance for reconciliation. I reread the message, the words cutting deeper with each pass. It was over. But James wasn't done. He forwarded my messages to Joseph's wife, to my family, even to our children. The fallout was catastrophic. Joseph called in a rage, blaming me for destroying his marriage. I threw his blame back at him, but it was futile. The damage was done. My family's anger was a storm I couldn't weather, their voices sharp with disbelief and pain. Worst of all was the disappointment in my children's eyes, a silent condemnation that pierced me more than words ever could. They made it clear. James was gone for good. Left amidst the ruins of my choices, I faced a life forever altered. All I could do was try to piece together what remained, knowing that the world I had known was lost beyond repair. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. In the dim ambiance of a secluded alcove, she sat with her back toward me at one of the shadowed tables. The setting was an intimate Italian eatery, one we had cherished during the early years of our marriage, long before the demands of parenting entered our lives. Her bare shoulders were framed by soft, cascading waves, a hairstyle she seldom wore. Even under the subdued glow, I recognized her instantly, Elizabeth, my wife. Across from her sat Alexander Miller, her employer. Their work conference had apparently wrapped up a day ahead of schedule. John Hendricks, the company's CEO, had concluded negotiations earlier than expected. Pleased with the outcome, he had rewarded the team with a generous bonus and a long weekend. Since the drive from Brighton to Suffolk took only 4 hours, I decided to return home. The extra time off didn't mean much to me. I wasn't an employee, but had been assisting John as an old friend. By mid-afternoon, I reached our tranquil coastal village near Ipswich, navigating traffic to arrive at our home, nestled within a tight-knit community about 15 miles from town. As I passed through Ipswich, I thought of booking a table at a familiar restaurant for Sunday as a surprise for Elizabeth. The bistro had changed over the years, now bustling with unfamiliar faces. A part of me half expected Luigi, the former owner, to greet me with his warm smile. But of course, much had shifted in the 25 years since we last celebrated Elizabeth's first pregnancy there with her parents. While finalizing the reservation with a young receptionist, a burst of laughter drew my attention. It was a sound I knew intimately, Elizabeth's. I turned and saw her, seated across from Alexander. Our history made the sight especially bitter. He had once been my nemesis in school, a tormentor who had stolen my first girlfriend. Katie Ryland had been my date for the end-of-term dance. We had been together for only a month when Alexander decided she should be his. With wealth and charisma on his side, he easily won her over. They married, but his habitual infidelities led to their divorce a decade ago. And now, here he was again, sitting across from Elizabeth, his expression as self-satisfied as ever. Their fingers lightly brushed on the table, a small gesture that cut deeply. I froze until the receptionist interrupted. "Would you prefer the reservation from 2 to 4 or 3 to 5, sir?" she asked. I mumbled, 3 to 5, please, my gaze still locked on Elizabeth. She wore a white summer dress, adorned with floral patterns, the one I had gifted her last spring. It flattered her figure beautifully, highlighting her neckline and shoulders. But why was she here with Alexander? Why were their hands so close? In moments like this, you envision yourself marching over, demanding explanations, causing a scene. But reality tends to unfold differently. Instead, I sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the memories of the past and the pain of Katie's betrayal. A young waitress offered me water and asked if I was okay. I nodded weakly and stumbled out of the restaurant. 15 minutes later, I parked near the bistro, keeping a watchful eye on its entrance. My mind churned with dark, restless thoughts of confrontation. Around 5 p.m. they emerged. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow on Elizabeth, making her dress appear almost translucent. She looked radiant, while Alexander followed close behind, his arm casually draped around her waist. They moved like a couple, her body leaning slightly into his as they walked to his car. My stomach churned. He opened the car door for her, his hand lingering on her leg before sliding beneath her dress. Her laughter rang out again, bright yet haunting. I ducked low in my seat as they drove off, leaving me consumed by spiraling thoughts. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I could summon the will to leave, tears blurring my vision and a splitting headache forming. As I turned onto our street, I spotted Alexander's Jaguar discreetly parked a few houses down. My chest tightened. The neighborhood seemed unchanged, neatly trimmed lawns, cozy bungalows, yet my world felt shattered. I parked near Old Man Brown's house at the cul-de-sac, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me fantasized about confronting Alexander, confronting Elizabeth, even resorting to violence. But confusion and pain prevailed. Determined to face them, I texted Elizabeth twice, asking if she was okay and letting her know I'd be home the next day. She didn't respond. My frustration mounted as I approached the house. Each step toward the driveway felt interminable, adrenaline surging through me. My fists clenched as I imagined storming inside. The Jaguar remained parked, and the house was eerily silent. Abandoning the front door, I circled to the back gate. It was never locked, merely latched for convenience. Keeping low, I crept toward the French doors we'd installed 2 years prior. They provided a clear view of the living room. My heart raced as I peered inside. On the dining table, familiar items were scattered: a handbag, a coat, a set of keys, and a phone. Then, movement caught my eye. Alexander stood with his back to me, his shirt unbuttoned, his pants likely pooled around his ankles. Elizabeth knelt before him, her head moving rhythmically in his lap. My breath hitched, the scene shattering every remaining illusion I had left. Crushed by an overwhelming and suffocating dread, I turned my head away, collapsing against the cold, unyielding surface of the brick wall. My chest heaved with sharp, uneven breaths. The harrowing scene I had just witnessed etched indelibly into my mind. The image of her doing that to him struck like a gut-wrenching blow, far worse than if the roles had been reversed. A sickening nausea churned within me, and my breath grew shallow and erratic. Standing just beyond those doors, I felt stripped of all power, engulfed by a profound sense of insignificance. The rage I had clung to so fiercely evaporated, leaving behind a crushing void of sorrow. Compelled by a dark, inexplicable urge, I leaned closer to the window, peering through a narrow gap where the curtain didn't quite meet the frame. The opening was just wide enough to provide a clear, unfiltered view of the room. My trembling fingers raised my phone, snapping a few incriminating photos as evidence. My hands shook as I typed out a terse message to her and sent it without a second thought. Her phone, sitting nearby on the table, lit up with my name. He noticed first, picking it up and reading the message aloud, a cruel laugh escaping his lips before handing it to her. "Your husband," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Elizabeth's expression remained unshaken as she met his gaze with unsettling calm. A faint, almost dismissive smirk flickered across her lips as she placed the phone back on the table. Something inside me shattered irreparably. Unable to restrain myself any longer, I stepped forward, fully revealing my presence in the doorway. My phone remained in my grip as I dialed her number. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she picked it up. Still oblivious to my presence, she answered, her attention focused solely on him. My fists clenched at my sides, shaking with barely contained fury. The thought of smashing the glass and ending this charade by force briefly crossed my mind. Instead, her voice drifted through the phone, maddeningly composed. "Hi, Marshall. Is something wrong?" Her head stayed down, her eyes fixed unwaveringly on him. He watched her with detached amusement, neither of them acknowledging me. My throat tightened, and I struggled to speak as she repeated her question. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I croaked, my voice barely audible. The tension in my clenched fists eased slightly. Her familiar, soothing tone drained the fire from my veins, replacing it with an aching, hollow despair. I mumbled something incoherent about being fine and ended the call with a vague promise to see her the next day. "All right, baby. See you tomorrow," she said lightly. As the call ended, my legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, shaking with uncontrollable sobs. This wasn't me. I wasn't the type of man who fell apart like this. I had always prided myself on being composed and level-headed. Yet here I was, unraveling completely. Who had I become? Dragging myself to my car, my thoughts churned in a chaotic storm of shame and fury. The idea of revenge simmered at the back of my mind, though its form was as elusive as smoke. Confronted with such a betrayal, it was impossible to predict how I would react. I had never imagined feeling so utterly defeated. I drove aimlessly, eventually checking into a rundown motel on the edge of town. In the dimly lit bar attached to the motel, I drank until the world blurred around me. Picking fights with strangers became my release, as though inflicting pain on others could somehow alleviate my own. My knuckles bore fresh cuts and bruises, and my face carried its share of marks. For fleeting moments afterward, I felt a grim satisfaction. Fueled by alcohol, I made the catastrophic decision to send her the photos at 2 a.m. The instant my phone lit up with her frantic replies, I felt a twisted sense of vindication, knowing I had ruined their night. Her messages poured in, panicked and pleading, but I ignored them. A bitter satisfaction swelled within me. Now you care to respond, I thought darkly. In my drunken haze, I committed an unthinkable act. I forwarded the photos to the kids. The moment I hit send, regret crashed over me like a tidal wave. Frantically, I tried to undo it, but the damage was already done. Overwhelmed by exhaustion and self-loathing, I turned off my phone and collapsed onto the motel bed. Let them deal with it, I thought bitterly as I drifted into a restless, tormented sleep. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a mouth so dry it made me gag. Stumbling to the motel's convenience store, I grabbed coffee and painkillers to dull the edge of my misery. When I finally turned my phone back on, it exploded with notifications. Most were from Elizabeth, but one message from my daughter, Kelly, stood out. Her words were simple, yet devastating. "Dad, what the hell?" My heart sank as the full weight of my drunken mistake settled over me. What kind of father does something like that? Elizabeth's calls came next, her name flashing insistently on the screen. I answered, my voice sharp and unyielding. "What do you want?" I barked. "Marshall, please," she began, but I cut her off, shouting, "Leave me alone!" before silencing the phone and retreating into the shower. Later, curiosity got the better of me, and I skimmed through her texts. They were filled with apologies and desperate pleas, but none of them asked how I was or offered to come back. That omission cut deeper than I cared to admit. For a week, I drowned myself in isolation and alcohol, cutting off contact with the world. Eventually, I reached out to my kids, arranging to meet them in a neutral public place. At the cafe, David arrived first, his quiet demeanor offering a stark contrast to Kelly's fiery entrance moments later. Her anger burned bright as she stormed in, while David's rare gesture of reaching for my hand felt like an unexpected lifeline. Tears streaming down her face, Kelly threw her arms around me, her words piercing through my fragile defenses. "Why, Dad? Why would you send those photos?" Choking on my own shame, I whispered through trembling lips, "I was angry. I didn't think. I'm so sorry. Dad, Mom's really upset. Could you talk to her? Please?" "And say what?" I shot back, frustration clear in my voice. "Did you not see what she did? And in our own house?" David's tone was gentler than his sister's, almost pleading. "Dad, come on, just come with us, please." "No," I said flatly. "Let her stew in her guilt. Let her deal with the mess she made. She means nothing to me now." Their stunned expressions said it all. They looked horrified, as if they couldn't recognize me. My words were venomous, the kind I had never used to describe their mother before. Realizing how far I had gone, I quickly offered a gruff apology. Admitting my fault in sending those incriminating photos felt like the least I could do, even if drunken anger had fueled my actions. Days turned into a week of relentless begging from the kids. Eventually, I relented. We agreed to meet at the house, though I made it clear they both had to be there. Elizabeth resisted the condition but finally gave in. When I saw her again, I almost didn't recognize her. She had grown gaunt, her once vivid complexion now pale and hollow. Dark circles framed her eyes, which darted around nervously. It was pitiful, really, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel oddly satisfying. The confident, spirited woman I once loved was now a shadow of herself. As I stepped inside, she rushed toward me, arms open. I stepped back sharply and she crumpled to the floor in tears. David glared at me before rushing to help her up, guiding her to the living room. "She's not eating. She's barely sleeping," he said, his tone accusing. "She's on medication now. It's been rough for her since everything fell apart." He said it like I was to blame. Kelly sat silently at the dining table, her expression icy as she watched her mother collapse into a chair. She began pouring tea into 4 cups, her movements deliberate and disdainful. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Tea, as if that could magically repair the wreckage. I hesitated near the table, my gaze fixed on it. This was where it had happened, where she had betrayed me. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to leave and never return. "Dad, how do we get past this?" Kelly asked suddenly, her voice calm but resolute. "Mom says it was a one-time thing. She swears it won't happen again." I looked at Elizabeth, who sat slumped at the far end of the table. Her hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry, kids," I said, my voice heavy with disbelief. I can't wrap my head around it." Elizabeth's anguished cry filled the room as she slammed her head against the table. The kids jumped in shock. David rushed to her side while Kelly remained rooted in place, her cold gaze unwavering. That day, Kelly became my unexpected ally. She reached across the table and gripped my hand firmly. "What Mom did was disgusting," she said without hesitation. "She knows it. We all know it. But she got lost in something stupid. She'll do whatever it takes to make things right." "I'm not sure she can, Kelly," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. "Anything," Elizabeth whispered, her voice barely audible from across the table. I looked at her, a mixture of pity and disdain churning inside me. In that moment, I think she finally realized it was over. 2 weeks later, with my friend John's guidance, I started the divorce process. The kids weren't thrilled, but they accepted it. We split our assets amicably. I sold my share of the house and used the money to purchase a modest apartment, while Elizabeth took out a mortgage to keep the house. David visits her occasionally, but Kelly rarely does. Her resentment over the family's destruction is too great. Elizabeth eventually left her job, never seeing her boss again. I even put in a word with John, and she started working for him. Despite everything, she's still the mother of my children. As for me, I moved to a quiet fishing village on Scotland's western coast. A year later, I sold the apartment for a profit and fully embraced my new community. The locals welcomed me warmly, offering friendship and support. I met Megan, a kind widow, and began helping her with various repairs around her home. She's become a close companion. I also found work with a major oil company, doubling my salary and significantly improving my quality of life. They say revenge doesn't bring satisfaction, but I'd argue otherwise. 4 weeks ago, Alexander Miller, Elizabeth's former boss, was attacked in his mansion. A masked assailant left him unrecognizable, stealing a few items to make it look like a robbery. His once handsome face is now marred with scars, requiring years of reconstructive surgery. He begged for mercy, offering apology after apology. Initially, he stuck to his story about a single encounter, but after losing something dear to him, he confessed to a 6-month affair. During the attack, I had an airtight alibi, calling bingo numbers at the local pub, surrounded by witnesses. John had discreetly arranged for my quick return home. Miller knows who orchestrated it but can't prove it. Although I finalized the divorce before learning the full extent of Elizabeth's betrayal, I feel vindicated. She now lives in fear, wondering if the man in black might target her next. She doesn't know I'd never rob my children of their mother, but the fear serves its purpose. In the 2 years since, I've cut all contact with her. Any updates come through my parents, who say she's drowning in regret. Family gatherings are avoided, though the kids visit her occasionally. David recently became a father to a beautiful girl named Sarah. Kelly has bonded well with Megan, though Megan understands she can never replace her mother. One foolish thing still haunts me. I recorded a 15-minute video of Miller's torment, his agonized screams echoing in the footage. On my darkest days, I watch it. Every second fills me with grim satisfaction. Was it worth it? Without question. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.